Thank you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to those who are joining. We see participants joining right now. If you are here, go ahead and make sure to get on Twitter, get on LinkedIn, get on email, invite a friend, tell them this is the place to be. Very excited to be about to start our Undocumented Student Rights and Resources webinar. And we'll give folks just a minute or so to join. Okay, gave folks about a minute to join. Again, welcome. Thank you for sharing this afternoon with us for the Undocumented Student Rights and Resources webinar. We are very excited to be here with you all today. As noted, if you can go ahead and get on Twitter and get on email and use those social devices to remind folks that this is the place to be. We will go ahead and get started this afternoon. We want to be respectful of everyone's time, and we have a star cast for the webinar today. Incredibly excited and grateful to have all of you here and to have all of our presenters here. We'll introduce you to them in just a moment, but to get us started, would love to invite you all to use the Q&A feature on this webinar to share with us an action, a commitment, anything you are deciding to do today to get started supporting our undocumented students' rights and resources. I know we have many advocates on this call, on this webinar this afternoon, and so what are a few things you want to make sure people know we are doing today to support undocumented students' rights and make sure they have access to the resources that they need? You can go ahead again and share that in the chat. We would love to hear from you. And most importantly, we want everyone else to hear from you as well. So with that, go ahead and use that Q&A feature. I'm going to go ahead and jump in. Good afternoon. I'm Marty Alvarado. I'm the Executive Vice Chancellor for Educational Services here at the Chancellor's Office. Thank you for joining our 5th and final system-wide webinar as part of our Undocumented Student Action Week. I'm sure many of you have been joining us. It has been an amazing series. It's been amazing to hear everyone's stories and to hear about all of the amazing resources that are available and that people are taking action towards right now. If your colleagues or friends, as I've noted, if they're not here, you know the drill, go ahead and get them to join. Today's webinar will culminate our week-long celebration of Undocumented Student Action Week. And I want to thank all of our partners at the foundation, there's so many to list. All of our partners at the foundation and the league for their relentless commitment to support our undocumented students. I want to say an extra thank you to our staff and teams internal here to our Chancellor's Office who have been working relentlessly for months to pull this together in partnership with the foundation and the league and many, many others. I want to thank all of our colleges who shared how they design high impact practices to make sure that they are effectively serving our student population. And a big thank you to all of you who have joined us throughout the week and who more importantly do this work all day, every day on your campuses, advocating for our students. I thank our faculty, our students, our administrators, our practitioners, our advocacy organizations, and many, many more. We know all of you are working tirelessly to advocate for our undocumented students and create those welcoming campus environments where all of our students can thrive. Today's webinar will once again lift up the inspiring stories of our undocumented students, and they are powerful. It will also feature personal stories, lessons learned, and other testimony from those who have laid the groundwork for AB 540 and carried it across the finish line. We will also hear from those who are carrying the legacy of AB 540 forward through leadership, legislation, and power. Power to enact change for our community, to be a voice, power to enact change, to be a voice for the voiceless, and emphasize the role undocumented students play in our community, state, and nation. We hope today's webinar will leave you feeling motivated and rejuvenated, especially on this Friday afternoon. Our system has done so much to close equity gaps, but we know it has not been easy. It takes commitment, it takes time, it takes people, it takes hope, it takes all of the things that you all are doing every single day and giving to one another. But undocumented students are among our most vulnerable students. It's been 20 years since the passage of AB 540. We must consider what the next 20 years looks like. Thank you to our speakers from the Leticia A Network, Assemblywoman Rubio, Chancellor Rodriguez, and our students for leading today's discussion. And again, to our audience, please feel free to use the Q&A function and Zoom to ask any questions. So use that Q&A, make sure you know how to use it. Go ahead and chat your comment around what's one action you want everyone to know you are doing right now to make sure we are advocating for students' rights and the resources that they need. So with that, this is the best part of my job this afternoon, is that I have the privilege and pleasure of introducing Maritza Gomez, a proud Norco and Riverside Community College alumni, an amazing businesswoman and entrepreneur, and who's here today to share her story with all of us. Maritza will share how AB 540 and the DREAM Act allowed her to dream big and realize those dreams. Maritza, I'd love to pass it to you.
Thank you so much, Vice Chancellor Marty Alvarado, for the lovely introduction. Thank you to the California Community Colleges Chancellor's Office, and especially all of you for being an ally to our undocumented students. I am grateful to all the individuals that came together to create and push AB 540 and the California DREAM Act to pass. Both have been a life-changing experience for who I am and where I am today. Growing up, I didn't benefit from any of the immigration laws because I was either too old or I came to the US years after. The only thing that continued to motivate me was my education. My mom always told us to get an education, and of course, I wanted to make my mom proud, knowing that she didn't have the opportunity to go beyond third grade. As I was getting college ready, I was taking my SATs, my ACTs, applying for colleges, and trying to plan out my future. One of my high school counselors said that people like me don't go to college. At that time, I didn't know what she meant. Her comments have stayed with me to fuel that people like me do go to college. Undocumented people go to college. Being the first in my family to navigate the college system, I didn't have someone to guide me, but I am a determined person that will find ways to move forward, even if I have to create my own door. It took me 9 years to get my associates after graduating from high school. I still remember that feeling I had during graduation. I was expecting somebody to come from behind me and tell me you don't belong here. When the California DREAM Act passed, I don't know how I managed to complete that application, but I did. I was thrilled and beyond excited that my dream to transfer to a 4-year university would finally happen. I went back to college to complete the units I needed to transfer. And this time, the assistance to pay for my books and class was there. What would normally take an average student 2 to 4 years to complete, it took me 17 years. And this has been possible with my perseverance and the AB 540 and the California DREAM Act. I share this with you because if I was able to get a college education when I was told I wouldn't, imagine if that counselor would have said, let's find out how we can help you go to college. As students, we rely so much on the knowledge of our counselors or teachers and our administrators. It is your responsibility to assist us, to assist that student that feels like they don't belong. And then not everybody has the same determination. We just need someone to guide us to find our highest potential. You all here are the change makers. You are the ones that hold the future in our hands. When making policy decisions, please invite us to sit at the table, listen to our experiences and our needs. And when you are listening, listen. Don't compare our stories or our struggles to somebody you know. Provide safe spaces for us to feel welcome, and spaces for us to comfortably share our experiences, either through centers or through clubs on campus. Stand up for us when we are not there to stand up for ourselves. Invest in us by creating opportunities that will help us earn a living where we feel we are contributing to society. When creating change in your institutions, do it for the students, not for the recognition. We are not a box that you check off your personal agenda. We need you to walk the talk. That means you are an active ally 24/7, not just Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Be our voice when we haven't discovered ours. Thank you so much to each and every one of you for showing up for our undocumented students and for creating opportunities and change.
Thank you so much, Maritza, for sharing your story with us. We need you to walk the talk. I like that. I'm going to take that home. That's what I write down. I hope everybody who's been joining us all week has been making sure to write down some of these really important, I almost want to call them nuggets of wisdom, but that's not enough to describe what they are, Maritza. They're what our students are telling us. They're what our alumni are telling us. They're what the members of the community college family need us to hear. So please, that is one I will write down. And I want to thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Maritza. Folks, I have to say, I have to agree with Marty. The best part about Undocumented Student Action Week by far, so far, has been kicking off each webinar with a current or former community college student sharing their experiences in our system and navigating the challenges that our undocumented students face. My name is David O'Brien. I'm the Vice Chancellor for Government Relations for the California Community Colleges, and I'm pleased to introduce our discussion and the main topics of today's webinar. So first, we'll provide an overview of the major student supports and rights, including financial aid, that are available to undocumented students in the community college system. That's what we're here for today. It's all about the fact that these are not just sort of a nice to have for our students. These are their rights. These are what the state of California has declared our undocumented students have a right to access. This will ground us in the discussion about legislative advocacy and resources available to these students. Then I will have the privilege of introducing our first two guest speakers in order, Assemblymember Blanco Rubio and Los Angeles Community College District Chancellor Francisco Rodriguez, followed by our panel today, which is going to be a very special one because we're going to hear both from advocates for those rights, for equity-centered policies supporting undocumented students, as well as another recent student who's a beneficiary of those policies. So when we get to that panel, I'll be introducing Irma Archuleta and Alfred Herrera, co-founders of the Leticia A Network, who will share some of their lessons learned as advocates for AB 540 and the other laws and rights for undocumented students, and as well as Perla Gonzalez Ramirez, a recent California Community College graduate, who will share her experiences as a student, what those policies have meant to her, and what current and future students need to be successful. Before we get there, just a very brief overview of those policies and rights we're going to be discussing today. So you all are familiar, I hope, with Assembly Bill 540, but that was the pioneering legislation that California enacted in 2001 that, you know, in a very technical sense, what AB 540 did was authorized eligible undocumented students to attend California colleges and universities and pay the in-state resident tuition rate. But from a much higher moral sense, what it did is it sent a message loud and clear to our undocumented students that you belong here. You belong in higher education, you belong in California, and we want to help you get there. Now, it took about another 10 years after AB 540 was passed, but in 2011, California passed two bills that collectively are somewhat colloquially known as the California DREAM Act, that authorized students who are attending under AB 540 to apply for state and institutional financial aid, including the Cal Grant program, which was a game changer for those students. Several years later, we expanded access to that AB 540 non-resident tuition exemption through Senate Bill 68, which allowed for adult school and community college credits to be counted towards the experience a student has to have to receive that exemption. And then a couple of bills in more recent years that are getting off the ground and we hope will continue to press forward on this equity agenda and create new opportunities for undocumented students, include the second AB 540, we could call it AB 540 Part 2, or the sequel in 2019 by then Assembly Member, now Senator Monique Limon, who we heard from earlier this week. That is legislation to create a work-study equivalent program known as the Dreamer Service Incentive Grant for AB 540 students. So critical to allow those students to have access to additional financial support to afford the total cost of attendance while they're doing volunteer work or paid internships. And then finally, we're very excited to be able to introduce this one because, spoiler alert to our upcoming speaker in just a moment here, just last year, we passed Assembly Bill 1645 after a few attempts by Assembly Member Blanco Rubio, creating Dreamer Resource Centers and Dreamer Resource Liaisons on all of our campuses in the community colleges, the CSU and the UC system. So for the first time ever, those students will have access to a one-stop shop center that can help them with things like financial aid, like support for social services programs to address their basic needs, internships, academic opportunities, all sorts of things. It's nothing short of a game changer for our students. And I'm especially pleased to be able to say that this list isn't even a comprehensive list of all of the supports and rights we have available to our undocumented students. So we're really, really excited that all of these exist, but understanding how we got here is so critical, understanding the advocacy that got us here. So let me then transition, because as I said, the best part about these webinars has been hearing from our students, and I'm biased because I work in government relations, but I think the second best part has been the opportunity to interact with our many great elected officials who have worked so tirelessly to expand these opportunities and break down barriers. So I do have the privilege of introducing Assemblymember Blanco Rubio, who represents the 48th Assembly District, including the cities of Baldwin Park, El Monte, and West Covina, California, among others. Assemblymember Rubio is a native of Juarez, Mexico, and attended both East Los Angeles College, Go California Community Colleges, and Azusa Pacific University. And prior to her election to the state assembly, served on both the Valley County Water Board and the board of the Baldwin Park Unified School District. And we're really excited to hear from Assemblymember Rubio about her journey and her role as an advocate for undocumented students and dreamers, including through AB 1645. So thank you so much, Assemblymember. I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so very much. It's an honor to be here with you today. I wanted to, first and foremost, congratulate you on the webinars. It's so important that our students understand that there are resources for them. So as you stated, I'm Assemblywoman Blanca Rubio. I wanted to share that I was undocumented. My family and I were deported. We are from Juarez, Mexico. My dad was part of the Bracero program, and he has been in and out of the country since he was 19. My dad just turned 81. And one of those journeys, we ended up in a little town called Weenie, Texas, on the border of Louisiana and Texas. And I always joke that after the Bracero program ended, we still needed to eat. So my father continued to go back and forth. And in one of those visits, he brought us along. And we were caught by, at the time, INS, and we were deported and went back to Juarez. My parents were adamant about us not growing up in Juarez, as you know the situation there. But more than anything, we had the American dream. And so we came back this time to California. We lived in downtown Los Angeles for a very long time. I went to Belmont High School in downtown LA. And as our previous speaker was amazing, we have a similar story. I wanted to go to a place called college, and the counselor told me that, literally said, "Oh, honey, you're just going to get pregnant and have children. Why don't we just put you in a home ec class, put me in a home economics class?" I don't know if that really fueled. I haven't decided yet, because I have a big passion for, doing the right thing for our kids, for our students. And it really did change, I think, the trajectory of what we were going to become. I also have the pleasure of having Senator Susan Rubio as my colleague, who is my sister. And I was the first undocumented deported member of the state legislature, and my sister Susan Rubio is the second undocumented deported legislator in the history of California, as well as the only two sisters who have ever served in the state capitol. And I say those things because, as we all know, our counselors do have an obligation to help us. And most of the time they decide, what we can and cannot become. And so that counselor decided that I wasn't going to become anything other than a, housewife, I guess. And so anyway, started at East Los Angeles College. It took me about 12 years to finish from East LA College, transferred to Azusa Pacific University. I became a teacher, spent 16 years as a teacher, trying to motivate some of our parents to make sure that their dreams were realized through their children. Then ran for state assembly in 2016, and I am now on my 5th year, actually ending my 5th year as a state assembly member. And part of, one of the proud moments, obviously, for me was being the author of AB 1645 to create Dream Resource Centers for our colleges. I share the story, I think, of many of you, that we didn't really have role models. I'm the oldest of 5 children. I didn't have anybody to say, hey, don't worry about what the counselor said, this is how you do it. So it took a long time for me to go back and really realize that we can do this. And so now that I sit as a state assembly member, I'm always thinking about my experience and how I can make our lives better, but mainly through education. It's so important, the work that you all do. And, I value the feedback and the ideas of how we can make this work. And so 1645 was one of, I think, a very small, in my opinion, one small step to what we can do for our undocumented students, for them to be successful, because it takes all of us collectively to make sure that we provide the resources that are available. And I just end with this. My EGO goal is to go back to Belmont High School, do the commencement speech, and say that somebody there decided that I wasn't going to become anything other than whatever he decided. And I want to tell him, he's long gone, but I want to tell the students that somebody decided for me what I was going to become. But not only did I graduate from ELAC, graduated from Azusa Pacific University with a bachelor's and a master's degree, but now I have an office in the big white building in the middle of Sacramento, and I can make real change for our community. So thank you for having me. And I agree, this should be an inspiration. And I hope to be part of that inspiration to you, that if somebody like me that was undocumented and deported can hold a seat in the state legislature, your opportunities are endless, and we are here to support you and do whatever we can to make sure that you are successful as well. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Assembly Member. I absolutely, I didn't have it planned to say, but towards the end of our webinar today, we're going to be asking some of our panelists for some of their inspiring words for our students. And I just have to say, I think on behalf of everybody that, to be able to go from somebody who was undocumented and went through deportation all the way to being an elected member of the legislature, making change, on behalf of California and our students is so significant. So really thank you for being here today and for everything that you do, and just for sharing your story. And I think I can speak for everybody else on this webinar when I say, really hope you get to go back and do that commencement speech as Assembly Member, because they need to hear from you, especially the people who doubted you need to hear from you. And there a lot of folks are hearing from you here today. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
I want to transition now to a leader who is working hard not just to implement some of those policies that our great elected officials like Assemblymember Rubio have fought for, but is constantly seeking to innovate and develop new solutions to addressing equity gaps in the community colleges. Dr. Francisco Rodriguez has been the Chancellor of the Los Angeles Community College District since 2014. LACCD is the largest community college district in the nation, with over 200,000 students served. And Chancellor Rodriguez has been at the forefront of so many critical efforts in California community colleges in recent years, including, among many others, the development of the California College Promise program, providing 2 years of tuition-free community college to all first-time full-time students, and the fight to ensure that all community college students are exposed to a diverse, decolonized curriculum through ethnic studies courses. More directly relevant to today's conversation, I want to personally thank and commend Chancellor Rodriguez and LACCD for being leaders in allowing us to provide legal services to undocumented students and their families. Many of you may be aware that the state of California has provided funding for these services for several years, which are critical to students being aware of their rights, filing for DACA status and seeking citizenship, and many other circumstances. But I think it's safe to say that our students would not have access to these critical services if Chancellor Rodriguez had not stepped up to the plate and shown leadership on this issue. So I want to thank the Chancellor on behalf of the entire community college system and invite him to share some remarks with us. Chancellor Rodriguez, thank you for being here.
Just thank you, David. We want to start this. Wow, thank you for that. I'm moved personally, powerfully by Maritza's words, by the words of the Assemblywoman, and this is a wonderful space to be here with in service and in community with each of you. So, David, thank you. We're partners. LACCD is a district that I want you and the system office to know that they can lean on and work with to move these equity advancements forward. As the dreamers say, we are unafraid and frankly, we're unapologetic about the work that we do to move this equity agenda forward. So again, gracias. I appreciate the kind invitation, and I'm moved by what I'm hearing so far. Thanks for to all of you who have been involved with this undocumented student action week. Acción, I think that's an important word that we need to think about as we hear the panelists today, and as we look to the ways that we will filter what we've learned into our practice as administrators, as instructors, as nonprofit leaders, as those who want to support and advance this equity agenda called advocacy for undocumented students. Trustees, instructors, support staff, legislators, our university and nonprofit partners, we're all involved with supporting and advocating undocumented students in some way. And for those who have done that, I want to say gracias and to stay the course. Your leadership on this matters now. It will continue to matter and be necessary as we move forward. It matters because consistent leadership and consensus on these issues of equity, inclusion, of anti-racism, and how we support the 70,000 or so undocumented students throughout our 116 community colleges impacts the climate of teaching and learning, and ultimately the performance of under-resourced and undocumented students. Without a major shift to be anti-racist in higher education and to combat the anti-immigrant narratives, our profession further bifurcates and passively perpetuates inequality and educational disparity. Unless we have frank dialogue about power, privilege, and positionality, who teaches and what we teach in our classrooms, and an examination of our own leadership practices, colleagues, we run the risk of further, exacerbating the very inequalities and disparities that all of us on this call seek to disrupt and to ultimately eliminate. So leading by example in places like LACCD means making structural and permanent changes to root out the ill effects of racism, of homophobia, and anti-immigrant bias from our classrooms, our curriculum, and indeed our workplace. Our message today and throughout the week has been in support of undocumented students, our DACA students, our dreamers, and we need the message to continue to be clear and unequivocal. When they enter any of our universities or community colleges, we need to relay in whatever way we can que aquí los estudiantes aquí están en confianza. This is a place of confidence that we want to work with you to advance your educational lives. For our estudiantes, your persistence is your resistance. You are not alone. You are vital to the future and vibrancy of our communities, to the health of our economy, and frankly, to the stability of this nation. We applaud and support you for pursuing your higher education goals and for entrusting us. And you've heard from the Assemblywoman and from our other speakers that you will hear about how that support continues to be a motivating factor to seguir adelante. Through your success, we also recognize the efforts and sacrifice of your parents, of your familia. Their hard work is both an example for us and an inspiration. We should also recognize that the undocumented community in this country contributes about $11 billion towards the health of the economy. And there are over 2,000 dreamers working today, this second, on the front lines to combat COVID. Because of you, our community that is undocumented, our economy grows, our communities thrive. At this district, we're determined from what we're learning about mind shifts, but we're learning about, culturally effective practices, equity-minded practices, student-centric practices, to move from a culture of compliance to a culture of care, a culture of rules and rigidity to a culture of shared responsibility, of equity, and of justice. In 2017, our district took immediate action to construct 9 Dream Resource Centers throughout the district, providing key services, including financial aid, academic support, strong referral networks with our community partners for legal assistance and for mental health. We further amplified our district model by providing book vouchers, relief funds, gift cards, no-cost immigration legal services, a DACA fee relief assistance, and clearly close assistance and connection with our financial aid offices, intrusive counseling to ensure the academic success of our students, and clearly providing them connections for their wellness and well-being. It's also, our DRCs are a place to be in community. It's a safe place, a safe zone, a person where they can connect and feel supported and indeed safe on campus. For those colleagues on the line who would like to see what we're doing, just look under laccd.edu. We have in the front page and the bottom a button called Immigration Resources for our full listing of what we've done here over the last several years in an intentional and intrusive way. And it's worked. This past year, we had a record number of undocumented students transferring and graduating, and we're really proud of that. It overcame some incredible obstacles, not just their documentation status, but also clearly the public health crisis. So, and this subject, for so many of us here, it's important to acknowledge the allies, the co-conspirators, the enablers that have made all this work. This is personal to me as a son of immigrant factory workers, as an English language learner, as a first-generation college goer. It's important for us. And at LACCD, like our community colleges, we will commit to keeping our doors open to all students seeking an education. And we will advocate now at the local, state, and federal levels for the rights of all students, regardless of their immigration status. Expect that this district and other districts in this state will continue to take a leadership role as it stands to defend, protect, fight for undocumented and DACA students, and to protect and safeguard their particular integrity. You have my and our firm and unwavering commitment. Today, as I conclude here, the spirit, intent, and implementation of AB 540, of Leticia A, of the DREAM Act live on from all of us who dare to call ourselves, who continue to have the courage, not when we say coraje and corazon, to call ourselves educators and educator activists. We need now to push for federal legislation modeled after California. We have fallen short, and I know that there are persons like Senator Padilla who are going to help us to get there. To los estudiantes, never forget, ustedes son el orgullo y la esperanza de nuestra comunidad. You are the pride and the promise of our community. And with your education in hand, as a tool for emancipation, you are better positioned to lead and to serve our communities. Finally, if you are bringing a change agenda in whatever capacity you hold at your institutions, in your nonprofit sectors, at the universities, expect to be criticized, thwarted, or even threatened professionally, no matter the color of your skin, gender, or undocumented status. Never underestimate the resistance to change. But let us remember Fireball, Cedillo, Lara, Limon, Rubio, as we move forward and work towards sustained impact. It's worth whatever criticism and consequences may arise. Yes, it could be laden with fear and ambiguity, but I'm going to encourage us to do it anyway. Our students deserve nothing less. Siga adelante con ganas, sin pena y sin fronteras. Thank you, David, for the time, and I look forward to hearing the rest of the panel.
Thank you so much, Chancellor Rodriguez. I loved everything about that except having to speak after you, which I should never, ever, ever have to do again. But I really just want to thank you for your leadership, for reminding us of all the ways in which you're leading on behalf of undocumented students and all students at LACCD, and in particular, for highlighting the ways in which some of that awful discrimination and prejudice against undocumented students, against students of color, manifests itself, right? We know it's in far too many places. Even one place is too many, but it's in transfer, it's in equitable placement, right? And that's why you and so many others are leading on efforts like ethnic studies, like immigration legal services, like Prima Resource Centers, right? So that we can one day have a day when we don't even talk about that discrimination, when it's a thing of the past, when it's something we read about in history books. I mean, not history books if you're in the state of Texas, because they'll censor it out, I assume, but real history books. So thank you so much. And it's my pleasure now to transition to our panel. I'm so pleased to be able to introduce the co-founders of the Leticia A Network, Irma Achuleta and Alfred Herrera, who are going to talk to us a little bit about their work and the political environment of advocating for AB 540 and other critical equity policies and legislation that created the rights our undocumented students have today. But also we're going to bring into the panel Perla Gonzalez Ramirez, who is a community college alum herself and a beneficiary of some of these, and is going to share a little bit about her experience. So let's go ahead and get started with Irma and Alfred. Can one of you or both of you tell us briefly a little bit about the origins of the Leticia A network, what the political environment was like at the time, and the need and why the network was necessary to found? I'll turn it over to really either of you who wants to lead off.
Okay, well, let me go ahead and get started with that. Alfred and I already agreed that I would start it out. But first of all, let me thank all of you for including this really important history as part of this panel. And I know it's been 20 years that since the AB 540 came into law, but it's actually 40 years since we began this movement. The inception of the Leticia A network began around 1985 after the Alameda County Superior Court declared Leticia A ruling in favor of undocumented students and made this California's first official decision to grant residency to undocumented students for tuition and state aid purposes. However, the work that led to the creation of the association begins much earlier. And it begins with a organization known as the Eops South Coast Consortium. The Eops South Coast Consortium was established in 1977 by Manuel Gomez, then director of university outreach at UC Irvine, Ramon Cruz, director of EOP at Cal State Long Beach, and the collaboration of EOP and EOPS directors at 17 other colleges and universities. And I mention this because it's important that we understand the history, we understand the organizations that played a vital role in this development. Actually, our work with undocumented students begins here in the consortium in the early 80s, prior to the Leticia A ruling. And it began with organizations like the Mexican American Legal Education Fund. We teamed up with MALDEF to help them identify the students that would serve as litigants, that would be represented to go before the court to challenge the in-state residency. And this is where our work begins. Then after that, the MALDEF decides that the Leticia A networks needs to serve as litigants. And so then we become litigants in the UC Regents versus Bradford court decision. And again, in the 1995, and that was in 1990 that occurred, which of course overturned the Leticia A ruling, therefore requiring that the UCs no longer treat undocumented applicants as in-state residents for tuition purposes and for financial aid purposes. So in 1995, the American Association for Women is unhappy that the CSU continues to treat undocumented students as in-state residents, and therefore takes the trustees and of the CSU to court. And again, we are asked to file an amicus brief, and we do that, and we go to court. And of course, that decision too is overturned, and the CSU is then forced to also begin to treat undocumented students as non-residents. So again, there's a lot there that occurred, and this is when the Leticia A network comes into action, because this is when this underground movement that we had started with the Leticia A ruling takes effect, because now we move into figuring out how we're going to serve, how we're going to protect the students who remained in our systems. And for the 1990 decisions, I guess the silver lining was that the students were allowed, students who were already in the system were grandfathered in. And so they were allowed to remain as in-state residents. However, that did not happen with a CSU. The CSU did not get that grandfather clause. And so we had to move into action and figure out, how do we support these students? What do we do to continue to help them so that they can stay in school? So the Leticia A network moved into action. We started, developing not financial, but scholarship programs, raising funds for scholarship programs. We created the food pantry. This is where the concept of the food pantry began, because we knew that many of these students were coming to our campuses without any money, without food, money for food. So we started the food pantry so that the students knew they could come to our offices and they were able to then get some type of food into their body so that they could continue with their education. So these are the things that we did. And one of the other important things I think that the Leticia Network was instrumental in is going to scholarship associations and asking these scholarship associations to delete the residency or the US citizenship requirement. And we were successful in getting many of these, especially organizations, local organizations, to change that criteria. So then the Leticia A students or undocumented students that were coming in would be eligible for those scholarships, because that's all they had at the time. So this is now part of the history. This is something that happened prior to AB 540. It took almost 10 years. And Marco Farbo was instrumental in this, because he was one of our members of the Leticia A network. He was working for Richard Polanco at the time. And as the representative for Richard Polanco, this is where he learned and got involved with the plight of undocumented students. So we were so happy that after he got elected to office, we could then work with him on the legislation in state residency legislation. So anyway, that's a little bit of the history. In terms of the environment, the political environment, I think at the time was conservative. It was a time of political correctness, but in reality, our institutions didn't know how to deal with students of color. They weren't capacitated to handle students of color, let alone undocumented students. So if the institutions had to rely on an organization like the Eops Consortium in order to do the recruitment for underrepresented students of color, that tells you where the capacity was for the institutions at that time. So our role in the delivery of services for undocumented students was vital at the time, particularly as we close the 80s and we go into the 90s, that became one of the worst anti-immigrant periods in the state of California, ushering Prop 187, which was the most racist, law that passed here in California. And fortunately, thanks to MALDEF and other civil organizations, they were able to struck down that law. But again, it was a very difficult time for us to do this. And many of our legislators, such as Supervisor Hilda Solis, who introduced legislation during that time, ended up receiving a lot of hate mail. And so did Senator Polanco, because we were at the height of anti-immigrant sentiment in the state of California.
Thank you for that history, Irma, and for reminding us of what a tough time it was, particularly in the 90s, and those awful ads for 187 that were airing on television. And, you know, I personally worked for a state legislator who had voted for AB 540 and got to open some of that hate mail and take some of those calls. And it was really awful. I want to ask one more question again to either of you. As we think about the amazing work that you all did and the Leticia A Network did to pass AB 540, you know, so it's 2001, this pioneering legislation that's taken all this effort and organizing to pass has finally been enacted. But what then do you view as the main barriers to implementation, both those immediately after AB 540 and those that might unfortunately still persist today? What do you see those main barriers being? Oh, Alfred, I think you need to unmute yourself there.
Hi, sorry about that. So one phrase that we all know, you're muted. So I want to go back for a moment just to acknowledge a couple of things, and then I'll respond to that. And one of them is that want to thank and honor the late Arnulfo Casillas, who was the one of the leaders and co-founders of pulling us together as a group. He was the Trans Center Director at Glendale College, but also Dennis Lopez, Ramon Muniz, and Liz Iglesias, who were also co-founders of this movement, and just honor the work that they that they put into this. One of the things that I think is really critical and important is that 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, we didn't have social media. We didn't have a way to communicate quickly like we do now. And so it relied on the fact that we were in situations and in positions where we had made connections. So many of us were recruiters for our universities and had made the connections in the high schools and community colleges and universities. We essentially grew up together in this movement. And so it was really important because we started making phone calls to all kinds of people, asking them for the support. Once the Leticia A ruling came out, we knew that it was going to be challenged. We knew that somewhere along the way, someone would raise the flag and say, we got to get this out of the system, et cetera. And of course, it did happen. But until then, we mobilized by calling each other, by setting up meetings, by setting up meetings with students and parents to get students enrolled in college, because we knew once we got them enrolled, if they maintained continuous enrollment in community college, then they would be able to continue their in-state tuition. So we worked hard doing that, and it was a lot of phone calling and a lot of visiting. And that was really the key to it, is really utilizing the networks that we had established as recruiters out in the field to get them to get the word out to people. And so we had a lot of meetings and sessions where we helped students fill out applications and so forth. And so one of the other things that that moved us forward is, as we started to move and get mobilized, we also realized there were people out there that were standing up and saying that we couldn't do that. One of them, of course, was David Bradford, who was the registrar at UCLA. And unfortunately, I had the challenge of working with for years because he refused to process the documents for students to be granted in for that. So he filed a suit, which became the Bradford decision. And we all know what happened then. So from that point forward, which was 1991, we really moved to try to help students and help them keep the hope alive, so to speak. So to really help them understand that it was not the end of the educational education for them, but to keep moving forward and realizing that the challenges were going to be even greater at that point. But we worked hard. Once we were able, as Idma said, Marco was part of our group. And once he was elected, decided that was going to be one of his platforms, and moved hard to try to help get a bill. In the meantime, Hilda Solis, Richard Blanco, and several others had introduced legislation in the 90s, but of course it didn't pass because of the anti-immigrant sentiment. When we started writing the language with Marco, it was introduced in, I think it was 1999 or 2000, but it was rejected by the governor, and then we had to come back and resubmit. And finally, it was approved and signed into law. We also knew that it was going to be challenged at that point by people, and that there would be problems. Some of the lessons learned are, and some of the implementation challenges, language matters. It is really important to be clear about what your intent is, because when we were working on it and it was written in a general format so that it would be more inclusive, but what ended up happening is that it became exclusive. We had challenges with the CSU, as Edma talked about. We had challenges with people, the way that they wanted to implement the law. We had the challenges of people not knowing what to do. So part of it was the language was so general that it didn't really specify how and when and so on. In addition, training was critical. What we ended up finding out as a network is that each of the campuses were doing whatever they wanted to do. The systems were not in line, the campuses were not in line, and really the training. And so months and months and months after Leticia, even years after Leticia, after AB 540, there were people on the front lines at some of our universities that didn't know anything about it. And we're still telling students you can or you cannot do this and so on. So the training aspect became one of the things that we worked hard on, is developing a training that we could go out and help people understand what they need to do. So the language was critical, and the training, once this bill had passed, to make sure that everybody was abiding by the law in a manner that was beneficial to the students. And I'll stop there.
Oh, that's perfect, Alfred. Thank you so much, because I want to use that. I want to use those comments and that theme to bring in Perla, who's a recent community college graduate and student, attended Mount San Antonio College and currently works at the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley. And Perla, I wonder if you could share with us a little bit about your experience as a student sort of in the AB 540 era, what AB 540 meant to you, and what you would have changed or liked to have seen as a community college student.
Thank you, Brian, for the introduction, and thank you, Alfred and Leticia, for all the history and all the work that you all have done. So I guess, growing up undocumented, college was never an option for various reasons, right? I think first and foremost, I think back at my my journey, and I was actually exposed to, I knew what a halfway house before I even knew what a college was, right? I knew what a prison was before I even knew what community college. I didn't find out into community college until after I graduated high school, which is crazy to me. So I couldn't, right? One, for all of those reasons, but then also I couldn't afford it. And also because my 24 hours were not the same as some of my peers, right? There was no time for college work, working multiple jobs, commuting via public transportation, taking care of family, right? I was my mother's guardian, my mom's caregiver, and my nephew's guardian at the time. And I would think to myself, like, where do I fit in classes? How do I study? Like, how do I fit in work? All of this, right? All these needs, right? Like my family's needs, myself's needs. So those policies that benefit non-traditional students and undocumented students are crucial for accessibility to higher education, right? For example, AB 540 allowed me to pay in-state tuition and not have to carry the burden of paying triple cost of tuition, which I could have never afford. Whereas AB 130 and AB 131, which is the California DREAM Act, it allowed me to qualify to apply, right, and receive in-state financial aid and scholarships, right? Because prior to this, when I graduated high school, the DREAM Act was not enacted yet. So a lot of the scholarships that were out there that I knew about would say resident or citizen, right? And it's just like, that is very discouraging. And I just remember when I was in high school, I had told a counselor that I wanted to go to college. And I just remember her saying like, no, I don't think you can go to college, right? And it's just like, I could have, right? Had she told me that community college was an option, right? And she didn't present that to me. And like seeing these scholarships and seeing all these things was very discouraging for me. Someone who sometimes like couldn't even meet their basic needs, like having scholarships and having access to all this extra stuff like that the community college would provide, because I graduated from Mount San Antonio College, so shout out to Mount SAC, was super helpful to alleviate some of my financial needs and other non-monetary costs, right, with attending college, right? Because going to college is not just about money, it's not just about learning, right? But it comes with all this extra stuff, right? Like all this like mental drainage, right? All like, it takes a lot to go to college. And I think, moreover, having physical access to a dream program allowed me to advocate for myself, right? Like when I first started Mount SAC, the dream program was not established yet. So I was actually one of the cohorts who was brought on as one of the student workers there when the dream program was finally going to like be established at Mount SAC. But prior to that, it was just a lot of back and forth, right? Like someone would send me to somebody else, right, to get those resources. And that discourages a lot of people. And I think having like physical access was like especially crucial, right? Because you need community, right? And oftentimes when you're undocumented and you fill into these different pockets, right? Like non-traditional, undocumented, first generation, low income, like all of these like different, right, identities that one carries, you could feel alone sometimes because you're like, well, I don't fully fit in one area, right? And so it's just like building community and finding community is super crucial. So having access to a specific, like a location where undocumented students can just go in and ask for resources is super crucial. I think it was honestly the light for me, right, to be able to graduate community college, right? It took me a few years. I didn't like right away, right? I didn't do the 2 years, right? It took me a few years, but without that support, without without the counselor, without all those extra resources, I would have not been able to graduate from Mount SAC, right? Honors graduate, you know, I was able to transfer to UC Berkeley. I just graduated this May. And I actually was offered a job before I even graduated at Berkeley School of Business, and I currently work as a financial analyst for a financial services analyst for Haas. In all, I think we must continue investing not just money, but also resources such as mental health, food, transportation, and more to students in need. I think something that I feel like lacked when I was at Mount SAC that I actually found very helpful here at UC Berkeley was emergency funds. Right. I think there was a crisis that I was going through my very first semester here at UC Berkeley. And I was able to apply for those emergency funds, right? Because we don't have backup plans. I think as undocumented people, like very, very rarely do you have money saved up, right? Because we live paycheck to paycheck, right? And so like having access to that, having access to mental health resources. I was someone who has struggled with mental health, right? And I think it was also very difficult for me because at Mount SAC, I didn't have a specific someone who I can just go to and have like whatever weekly or bi-weekly sessions, right, to help and assist with my mental health. And I think something that was super helpful was that I found was here at UC Berkeley that they had a mental health provider for us that would specifically work with undocumented students. They wouldn't work with any other population other than documented students. So I think that is also something that I feel like community colleges should look into and should truly invest. Other things, right, is like basic needs, right? I think oftentimes you don't realize, but you know, like I know when I was in community college and even when I was at Berkeley, there were times where I would have to ration my food, or there were times where I couldn't even like, I would be like, oh, either I eat today or I eat tomorrow, right? So it's just like, I would take advantage of every time there was an event on campus because I was like, oh, there's free food, I'm gonna go, right? And so it's just like all of these things, honestly, are just really helpful. I just feel like oftentimes undocumented students are not comfortable speaking up, right, about the facts that we face all of these other barriers, right, apart from just like being first gen, right, or being first time like students on campus. Like there's all these other things that we carry on our back. And so I really hope that, you know, we continue advocating, we continue fighting, right, for these spaces, for these resources, right, for students like myself. And I think being able to connect with the right people and the resources through the DREAM program at Mount SAC really kept my hope alive, really like allowed me to become successful, gave me the tools necessary to succeed through my higher education journey. And so I want to give props to community colleges because I just feel like I think it really provided me like the foundation that I needed once I transferred out and really be able to advocate for myself. With that, I don't have anything else to share.
Thank you so much, Perla. Thank you so much to our panel, to Perla, to Irma, to Alfred, for all you have done, for all you're going to continue to do, and for being here today and sharing your words of wisdom with everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, we're at the end of the hour, but I want you to stick around for just a couple of more minutes because I want to transition it over to somebody who inspires me every day, my amazing coworker, Linda Vasquez. I hope those of you who have been part of these amazing webinars and the activities on your campus and throughout our system this week, I don't know if you can fully grasp just how much Linda's leadership and drive brought us all together. And I know Linda's going to thank the folks who have helped make this all possible behind the scenes. But Linda, my thanks to you, who is going to close us out. Thanks to all of our amazing speakers today, and for what an incredible 5th annual Undocumented Student Action Week it has been.
Thank you, David, and thank you. Join me in a virtual round of applause for all of our speakers. Everyone has joined us in our webinars, but all the voices that have not been represented in the webinars. There are so many people. Alfred and Irma named many of them. Perla, Maritza gave kudos and acknowledgement to so many leaders who've helped pave the way for them. And I believe we still have Chancellor Rodriguez and the Assembly member on the line. You're hearing a product of your transformative leadership, and these are the fruits of the seeds that you have planted. There are also, I'm getting kudos and notes from colleagues I have throughout the week, many of them who are DACA recipients or beneficiaries of AB 540 and are now working in our colleges, who are working in the tech industry, stories like Perla, stories like Maritza. So this is why we do what we do. This is our 5th annual Undoc Action Week. I hope we continue these weeks of advocacy, but you heard it in the theme, you heard it in all of our remarks. We don't just do this during the 3rd week of October. We live it and breathe it every day of the year, right? Every single day, and it's what we do, why we do what we do. And so I wanna just invite you to continue these conversations with your colleagues on campus. I want to acknowledge everyone who's been a part of making this week a reality. And I know that the Chancellor's office has held webinars, but all of you, if you're tuning in from a campus, I see Eric Lara on the line. I see Marisela Cervantes. I see Michelle from Lake Tahoe, and Rafa, Dr. Edward and Tricky, who's been at our webinars. Actually, I don't think he's missed any of our webinars. Gracias. Continue this work on your campus. A huge thanks to Alfred and Irma again, but also Dennis, who is not on the line. Please remain in touch with our colleagues at the Chancellor's office. A copy of the webinars will be available on our website for those of you who want to share with a colleague. And then again, I can't end my remarks without thanking all our partners who made this a reality. The Foundation for California Community Colleges, special note to Maristela Hernandez, and the League, Laura Morell, our Faculty Association, the Academic Senate, the Student Senate, the Campaign for College Opportunity, and the list goes on. Thank you. And with that, we wrap up our last webinar of Undoc Action Week. Muchas gracias.